So today we are going to talk about two separate ways that animals reproduce. Not just two ways, two kinds of reproduction. The first kind of reproduction we're going to talk about is asexually. Now, asexual reproduction means reproducing without sex, straight up, right? Sex, we'll talk about what that actually means later. Reproduction, you should know, is a general word that means making a new thing, right? Or copying a thing. Reproducing, making the next generation in this case. And asexual reproduction is reproduction that does not involve changing the gametes. Gametes, we'll remember, were sex cells that are a specialized cell that some organisms use to combine with the cells of others to fertilize, right? That's that process where the gamete from one thing, it's a gamete from another, and combines to make a new thing. So, asexual reproduction uses the genes from only one parent, and there are many different ways that this happens. There are some fungi that create spores that get released into the air. Some organisms, such as hydras, use something called budding. You want to think about budding. This is when a new living thing starts to grow and develop off of the parent. Almost like if all of a sudden a lump started to grow on your neck, and after a year, it was a tiny little you that jumped off and became its own thing. Now, some plants, including strawberries, reproduce by sending off special stems that they call runners. These grow along the ground. Weeds do this too. And sprout tiny new plants that can grow, take root, and then those stems will go away. This is why some plants you'll see tend to grow in patches. The best known, or there's another form called tubers. Potatoes are best known for being tubers. New plants grow from them by sprouts. If you've ever seen a potato where the eye has started to sprout, that's the potato trying to make more potatoes. Starfish are another great example. Alright, you cut a starfish, not that I've ever seen this happen, you cut a starfish in half and it regrows the legs, and if you, on both sides, so you then have two new starfish. So here's a nice image of budding. You'll see sea hydra, which are kind of like jellyfish that live on the bottom. They grow another little jellyfish off of them, and then that will separate and kind of float away. So, the most prevalent mechanism, right, the kind of asexual production that occurs most amongst prokaryotes is called binary fission. Right? After replicating their genes, doubling their genes within them, so for one moment they have twice as many genes inside them as normal, they all of a sudden divide in half and produce two identical offspring. This is actually what you're seeing, the idea behind what happens if you've ever played Agario. When you press the spacebar button, it shoots half the living thing off after it's gathered enough resources. This is what lots of things do. Right? So, let's remember that we have cells that are haploid and diploid. Diploid means it has all of the genes it would need to be a living thing. For this slight moment in time, this particular cell is no longer diploid. It's double diploid, right? And then it has mitosis, that process of cell division, where it splits off and becomes its own new living thing that has the same exact genes as the one before. Parthenogenesis is another mechanism of asexual reproduction that occurs primarily in invertebrates. Invertebrates, crabs, spiders, things without spines. It also happens in insects and green plants. It rarely occurs in things with spines in the vertebrate kingdom, but it will occur in snakes and reptiles. Essentially, you get something that lays an egg, but that egg only has half the cells the living thing, half the genes the living thing normally has. It is haploid, half the genetic material, haploid. That egg with half the genetic material that normally wouldn't be able to be its own living thing will develop into an adult organism with half of the genes that a typical living thing of that kind would have. It's kind of crazy. They've seen this in the Komodo dragon. So here we have a paragraph, and I'm not going to lie, I messed this up the first time through, so I am showing it to you correct. There are different methods for asexual reproduction. The animal method of budding is similar to the plant method of tubers, because in both cases, offspring develops and grows off the parents. Plants may also reproduce asexually using runners, spores, or parthenogenesis. Spores provide the plant with the advantage of being able to grow in new and faraway locations. Most prokaryotes use the most prevalent form of asexual reproduction, binary fission. This process is similar to eukaryotic mitosis because both involve DNA replication followed by cell division. So why would a living thing sexually reproduce, and how asexually reproduce, and why is that different from sexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction, plants and animals create offspring, they reproduce, by combining their genetic material. Their two haploid sex cells combined fertilize and make a new living thing. Asexual reproduction involves one parent. So with that, because there's only one parent, you don't need mating. Lots of green plants use both of these processes, sexual and asexual reproduction, in their life cycle. So each generation will alternate between two mechanisms. Plants are weird. Lots of plants give off spores, but we do know that if you've seen flowering plants, they use sexual reproduction to reproduce. Scientists theorize that this alternation of generations has evolved to maximize stability and diversity in changing changing environments. Organisms that reproduce asexually produce many offspring in a relatively short amount of time. Reproduction sexually generally has a long development period, and you only get one or two offspring. Elephants can take about 2 years to become a new living thing. Or elephants can take about 2 years for a baby to develop and become a new living thing, whereas bacteria may reproduce asexually every few minutes. Alright, and even less. Fungi may produce thousands of spores and release them into an environment, so it really seems that this is more a numbers game than anything, right? Asexual reproduction creates a lot of new living things very quickly, or I guess potential living things very quickly. We will do that later. Offspring of sexual reproduction receive one complete copy of a single parent's chromosome. They are genetically identical, in most cases, to their parents. Why does this matter? Well, you're cloning. Asexual reproduction is essentially cloning. They look exactly like the parent. In some cases, organisms have half the genetic material, in which case they may or may not look exactly like the parent, but they're going to look pretty similar because there's no diversity. The genes are exactly the same. The genes for the different traits tell those traits to be the same. In some cases, organisms reproduce asexually. Yeah. Honeybees are an example of this, right? The worker bees and drones develop from unfertilized eggs. Only the male honeybee has one copy of both chromosomes from the parent because it has to be a boy. So there are advantages to both of these things. Some organisms have a genetic abnormality, and it will pass that weirdness off to their offspring. So if that's a good thing, right? If you're a bee and it means that you can use some honey as you eat it, that will give you more energy. That means that will be good for you long term. If you're a bee and that abnormality means you have no wings, that's bad, right? So you're either passing on directly something helpful to your parent or to your children, or you're passing on something harmful, and that will be important later. So mutations that cause abnormalities can cause death, and in asexual reproduction, there's no way to have any diversity, right? If the parent has that abnormality, the children will have it. Mutations being beneficial, once again, if the parent has it, the children have it. There's no chance, there's no mixing. One last reason that asexual reproduction might be favorable over sexual reproduction is that asexual reproduction does not require a partner to produce more living things. That means if something lives a very solitary lifestyle where it never sees another living thing, it can simply have children, and there can be more of them. It's a weird survival mechanism, but it works. So we are going to stop there. We are going to go over sexual reproduction tomorrow, and that will be that.